What comes to mind when you hear the phrase, a redemption story? Just think in your head. What comes to mind? Oops. Redemption story. There's all kinds of examples of redemption stories. There's some in the Bible, in literature, in movies, in sports, just from day-to-day life as well. There are redemption stories about someone coming out of rock bottom. So think of the prodigal son. Other stories about people being forgiven, Joseph and his brothers, Jesus and Peter. Probably the most popular kind of redemption story is someone having a change of heart, right? So this is Saul the Christian killer meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus and then becoming the leading missionary for the early church. Or step outside of the Bible, it's Jean Valjean in Les Mis, repenting from his life of thievery due to the kindness of a priest. Now, I don't know about you, but actually what first comes to my mind when I think of a redemption story are two Christmas stories, so Ebenezer Scrooge and The Grinch, right? Among the most famous redemption stories ever written. The thing that all of these stories have in common is that a person or a situation or a relationship is restored. It's made new by the end of it. Now, of course, the whole Bible, the gospel that brings salvation, is itself a redemption story. And I think that that's actually why this genre of storytelling has been so compelling throughout history. It's so evergreen because this is the truest kind of story that there is. And as we finish up the book of Ruth today, we're going to see that there is a redemption story right at the heart of this book. But it's not a story about a villain having a change of heart, nor is it about someone being forgiven. It's a redemption story more literally. Something is redeemed and someone is restored. So a recap of the story before we jump back in, if you need a little refresher. Naomi lost her husband Elimelech and her two sons while living in the land of Moab. Her family had left Israel due to a famine, and now Naomi is left in a foreign land with no one to care for her. So she decides that she's going to return home to Bethlehem, and her son's widow, Ruth, pledges to care for her and to join her life to hers. And she does do this. She spends many days gleaning in the fields of a man named Boaz, who is a member of Naomi's extended family, and she does this to provide for her mother-in-law. Now, Boaz notices Ruth's loyalty and her kindness, and he cares for her in his fields. Now, in chapter 3, one night, with Naomi's urging, Ruth goes out to meet Boaz and makes a risky proposal to him. She wants Boaz to marry her and to purchase back Elimelech's land so that it stays within the family. Naomi cannot inherit the land, so they need a family member to step in and purchase it. Now, both of these requests are tied to Israelite laws, and neither of them are actually Boaz's responsibility to fulfill. But Ruth takes a leap of faith that Boaz will accept the responsibility, and long story short, he does agree to this. We'll say more about these laws in a moment. Boaz agrees, but there is a catch to this. There's actually a family member who is closer in line to redeem or to buy back Elimelech's land. And Boaz wants to follow proper protocol, so he's going to check with this nearer relative first to see if he would like to step up and take a chance at redeeming this land. So that's what this chapter is going to be about here. So if you want to turn to Ruth chapter 4 in your own Bibles, the final chapter of this book. When we tell the story of Ruth, often it's this last chapter that gets the least amount of attention. And that's probably because Ruth doesn't even really appear much in this chapter, so maybe that's why it kind of gets left out. But there's actually way more to this final chapter than I ever realized, so I'm excited to walk through this together with you. One last thing to set the stage. If you weren't here, or if you don't remember, when an Israelite man died with no son, or he fell on hard times and he had to sell his land, it was the responsibility of the nearest male relative to step up and redeem or buy back, purchase that land so that it would stay within the extended family. That person was known as the kinsman redeemer. Now, Elimelech died, and he has no son to inherit this land, so Naomi's at risk of losing this land. Boaz was asked by Ruth to redeem it. He's going to now check with the closest family member to see if he wants to accept this responsibility. Chapter 4, verse 1. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went and sat down. So a funny little note here, the NIV there translates what Boaz says as, "Come over here, my friend." But what he literally says there is, "Come over here, so-and-so," or such and such. He uses this phrase that refers to something unnamed or nondescript. The Hebrew for that is ploni almoni. I just think that's such a great little phrase. It sounds a little bit like a pasta dish to me. I'll have the ploni almoni, please. It means so-and-so. And I honestly think that we should insert this into our own conversations when we forget somebody's names. I'm so glad you're here at church today, ploni almoni. So-and-so. Maybe Boaz is just having a little bit of a brain blip here, and he's saying the equivalent of, "Hey, you." Some scholars suggest that the guardian redeemer's actual name has been scrubbed from the story because what he does here is a little bit dishonorable. I think there's actually a more pointed reason why he gets anonymized in this story, and we'll see that in a second here. So moving on, Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. So Boaz is setting up a legal exchange here. The city gates were often like the courthouse of a community, and he gathers together the town elders, witnesses for this transaction. And here's his proposal. He said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it," he said. Okay, let me map out what's happening here and what Boaz is proposing to Mr. Ploni Almoni. I spent a great deal of time working on this flow chart here that we're going to work our way through. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't actually know if this actually clarified anything or just made it more confusing, but I spent way too much time on it, so we're going to go through it together, and hopefully it helps. So you have Naomi and Elimelech. They are married, and they have 2 sons, Mahlon and Kilian. And they have land for their family. Now they move to Moab, and both of the boys take wives. They've got Ruth, and they've got Orpah. Now, while in Moab, Elimelech dies. And the land in Israelite law would just pass on to one of the sons. However, while in the land, those sons also die, which leaves the land kind of in limbo. Now, at this point of the story, Orpah leaves the picture, and it just leaves Naomi and Ruth there. And women could not be landowners. There's actually an exception to that rule. If you read in the book of Numbers, there are these daughters of a guy named Zelophehad who come to Moses and they say, "Hey, our dad died, and he only had daughters, so can we inherit his land?" So Moses goes to God, and God says, the girls are right in this situation, and the stipulation is that they have to marry within their tribe so that the land stays within the clan. And it's this fascinating case study that shows that the law of God was not strict legal code, but it was actually meant to teach principles of wisdom and righteousness to the people. Anyways, Elimelech has no daughters either, so he's out of luck on that front. It's just Naomi and Ruth. Now, what a widow could do in this situation here is enter into levirate marriage to produce an heir. We talked about this last time. So the brother of a man who died would marry his widow and produce an heir to carry on the family line. And it would be as if this son is Elimelech's child. And then that child would therefore receive the land there. Now, Naomi is out of luck on this front, though, because she's past the age of having children, and it doesn't even seem that there's a brother in the picture. So Elimelech's line is out of options here. Their family name is at a dead end. But what they can hope for is a kinsman redeemer who will come in and buy the land so that at least it will stay within the extended family. Now, Ruth, in chapter 3, she charted new territory because she urged a proposal on Boaz that would preserve both the family name and the family land. And we're going to see if Boaz can make this work out for her. So we're going to bring in Mr. So-and-so here. It's going to become clear in what he says that he has a family of his own. He's got a wife, he very likely has sons, and he has land of his own as well. Now, with everything that Boaz just presented to him, he sees this as a very good deal. Why? Because all he has to do is purchase this land. That's going to cost some money, but if he invests in this land and he works it for harvest, then that means he will have more property and therefore more wealth to share amongst his own sons. So, a significant short-term cost, but a large long-term payout for him. Now, he'll have to care for Naomi in this situation, but he sees it as worth it to increase his own estate for his family. Make sense so far? Okay, now Boaz is going to up the ante, and he's going to reveal the second part of this bargain. Then Boaz says, on the day that you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. So Boaz completely alters what's on the table here. So back to our picture. He says, by the way, you're going to get Ruth with this deal. She is the widow of the son who was set to inherit this land. And Boaz explains very clearly that the goal here is that they want to keep the land in the name of the dead, meaning you are going to marry her, you're going to produce an heir who will be a son of Mahlon and inherit that land for his father. So rather than the Redeemer getting to collect an extension on his estate for his own children, he will instead have to pay a good sum of money for land that will likely never belong to his own kids. Now, if Ruth is barren and can't have a son, then it's back to this, and it's the same situation. But it's a risk for him, because if Ruth does have a son, not only will that son get to inherit Elimelech's land, but that son will also get a portion of the financial inheritance from the Redeemer, the guy who fathered him. So what that means is that this guy will deplete some of his own savings to buy this land and be left with less personal wealth to split amongst more children than before. And so, at this, the guardian redeemer said, well, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. So you redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now, I don't think we're meant to look at this guy's response and look down our nose at him. He's making a pragmatic choice in the best interest of his family. It's a little bit like when Orpah chooses to go back to Moab. She's not a bad person for doing that. That's a sensible thing for her to do. She's being very reasonable. And likewise here, this Redeemer wants to do what's in the best interest of his children. And this deal would jeopardize their future. Now, the irony here is that in seeking to preserve his family name, this guy's actual name gets erased in the story. You've got Ruth and Boaz, who by name get woven into messianic history, and this guy becomes so-and-so. He becomes Ploni Almoni. Now, he's not doing anything wrong here, but he misses out on something so much better here. Now, these next verses add a fun little historical detail. The author puts in parentheses, now in earlier times for Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed his sandal. There's lots of speculation about what this whole sandal thing means and whose sandal is being used. And honestly, who knows? The person writing the book doesn't even know what the reason for this tradition was. So we're kind of just left to imagine what the significance could be. Whatever the meaning, this act legalizes the transfer. Verse 9, then Boaz announced to all the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not what? Will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are my witnesses. So Ruth's plan has worked. If you remember last time, we said Naomi sent Ruth out in the middle of the night in order to secure Ruth's future, but Ruth comes up with a creative way to secure Naomi's future. Elimelech's family name and his family land will not disappear. Now, it gets even better for Naomi, but we aren't there quite yet. Before we move on, let's just think about Boaz here. So, Mr. So-and-so, he saw this land as too big of a risk for him. He sees the price tag that's on Ruth with this land, and he backs away from it fast. Boaz runs toward this risk, though. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the risk for him? He doesn't seem to have a family of his own yet. Well, there's a cost to buying this land and to caring for Ruth and Naomi, and a social cost to marrying a Moabite, and a potential cost of marrying a woman who's barren and can't produce a son for you. I mean, there's a lot of variables that make this very risky for Boaz. Why doesn't he back away from this? Well, for this other redeemer, the land was the sweet part of the deal. That's the part that he's really interested in. And adding Ruth to the equation kind of sours the deal. But for Boaz, he's not really even interested in the land. What does he want? He wants Ruth. He's not interested in what perks she brings to the table. He just wants her. And you know, it's not very hard to make connections to Jesus here. Boaz anticipates and he enacts a picture of the gospel here. Just as he invites Ruth the Moabite to his table and joins his life to hers, so also Jesus invites outsiders to his table and he makes us family. Paul actually draws directly on this theme in the book of Galatians. When the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to what? Redeem those under the law that we might receive adoption to sonship. So Paul, he lays out the gospel here, actually, that our Redeemer made us his kinsmen. Ruth is a stranger to God's covenant people, but she gets brought into the fold, and likewise, all are welcome in the family of God. No matter your history, no matter your shame, no matter your status, you are welcomed into union with Jesus. And it's in this relationship that we are transformed. We're made new. His love makes us free, and it's his righteousness that becomes our inheritance. Let's watch how the story concludes here. So verse 11. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel." So, wow, Ruth is being told, may she, the Moabite, be like the matriarchs of Israel. That's high praise. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. So that last line there implies that Ruth was in fact barren, and God worked a miracle to allow her to have a son. Now, verse 13 there could be a beautiful ending to this story, right? But there's more redemption in store. Verse 14. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer." And now, referring to the baby boy, may he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. So on the one hand, they say Naomi is saved by having a son in the family again, a son that will renew her life, sustain her in old age. But then on the other hand, they say that Ruth, her daughter-in-law, is better to her than 7 sons. So Ruth has provided and cared for her mother-in-law above and beyond what 7 sons would be expected to do. Then the next verse. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. Something I had never noticed before in this story is that Ruth is basically a surrogate mother for Naomi. Naomi is not the sweet grandmother or the babysitter in this story. She becomes the mother for this child. I mean, Ruth's selflessness here is remarkable. She gives up her own son to fully restore Naomi. And if you don't believe me, look at what the women say next. Naomi has a grandson. No, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So the main character of this story was never Ruth, and it was never Boaz. It's Naomi. She's the one who has things to learn about God. She's the one who loses everything and is ultimately restored. She is the center of gravity in this redemption story. And by the end, not only does she gain a family, she also gets folded into messianic history. She will raise the grandfather of David, and from this line, Jesus will be born. So if you're tracking different lessons and applications from the story of Ruth, there's a message of hope right here. You're never too far gone. Life can never dip so low that God cannot redeem and restore. I mean, Naomi goes from being the subject of hushed whispers around town to being the source of praise and joy in the city. Life seemed like it was over for her, but God still had more story to tell in her life. And he has more story to tell in your life as well. You might feel like you are at a dead end, but God is still at work carving a path forward for you. Now, there's no promise that your life is going to have a happy ending like Naomi's does, where she gets back some of what she lost. But if you belong to Jesus, all endings are ultimately redeemed, which is what the final verses of this book anticipate. If you look at the end of Ruth, you'll see there's a short genealogy from Judah to David. And it's this little reminder that the story of salvation presses onward. Even in the era of the judges, which is an era where wickedness reigned and hope seemed entirely lost, God was using a widowed foreign immigrant woman to sustain his promises of a Redeemer King to the world. Naomi holds Obed in her arms, and she is redeemed and restored. Her sorrow turns to salvation. And many generations later, another baby boy will be born in Bethlehem. And through this son of David, the whole world will be redeemed and restored. And our sorrow turns to salvation. Would you pray with me? Father in heaven, thank you for the gift of Jesus, that the heaviness of our life, the sorrow that we face, the burdens we carry, these things ultimately don't get the last word because of you. Thank you for being our Redeemer, for making us your family. I pray that as we reflect back on this whole story in this short book of the Bible, that we would be inspired by the kindness and loyalty of Ruth, that we would be inspired by the risk-taking and the sacrificial love of Boaz, and that we would be reminded in the redemption story of Naomi's life that we're never too far gone, that you always are working for our good. We may not see that in this life, but ultimately and finally, that good will be manifest in a new earth when you come and you take us home to be with you forever. We look forward to that day, and we want to point people toward it. Pray this in your name. Amen. Just a reminder as we go that there will be special prayer up here by the screen. If you have things in your heart that you